How could you
Have you
do
ever
this to
been
me? You
betrayed by the
murderer!
people you loved
I
the
didn't do
most?
anything,
Tell me
please.
your story in the
Stop it,
comments.
you're going too far.
Someone out there needs to
You have
know
brought
they're not
shame to this
alone.
family. I want you gone.
She was kneeling at her
Stop this
father's
madness.
casket when
How
her
could you
husband's
strike a
hand
pregnant woman?
connected her face so hard the flowers shook. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And here is what nobody in that room understood, not even her. The frail old man sitting alone in the rain outside that funeral home, the one she had stopped to help, the one her husband called an embarrassment. He was holding a document worth $14 billion, and her name was on it. The rain had been falling since before dawn. It came down in thick, silver curtains over the city of Savannah, Georgia, the kind of rain that feels personal, as if the sky has something to say and won't stop until you've heard every word. Nora Calloway stood at the entrance of Whitfield and Sons Funeral Home on Drayton Street in a black dress she had bought 3 years ago for a different funeral, one she had not been allowed to attend. She was 34 years old. She was 5 months and 11 days pregnant. She had not slept in 41 hours. She had driven 9 hours through the night from Atlanta because her husband Dominic said she shouldn't fly in her condition. He had offered to drive her. He had been very kind about it. He had held her hand the entire way and told her everything would be okay and stopped twice for the gas station crackers she craved. She had believed him. She still believed him then. The funeral home sat on a cobblestone street, flanked by Spanish moss and iron gates, the kind of Savannah building that has absorbed enough grief to have its own gravity. Inside, 209 people waited to mourn Bernard Calloway, retired federal judge, pillar of the Georgia legal community, patriarch of the Calloway Trust family, and the father who had not spoken to Nora in 11 years. She had not known he was sick. She had not known he was dying. She had not known any of it until the call came from a paralegal she'd never heard of named Thomas Wren, who said simply, "Your father passed on Tuesday. The service is Saturday. I was instructed to make sure you knew." Instructed by whom, she had asked. By your father, Thomas Wren had said. Even at the end, even after everything, he had wanted her there. She hadn't told Dominic about the call for 6 hours. She had sat with it alone in the bathroom of their Atlanta home, sitting on the cold tile floor with her phone pressed against her chest, trying to understand how to feel about the death of someone who loved her and abandoned her and loved her again, all without ever saying it out loud. When she finally told Dominic, he had gone very still in the way he did when he was calculating something. "Of course we'll go," he said. "He was your father." And then, after a pause, so brief she almost didn't catch it, "Will there be a will reading?" She should have heard it then, the way a lock clicks. She didn't. Outside the funeral home, the rain hammered the awning. Nora stood just inside the entrance, smoothing her dress, trying to gather herself before facing the room full of people her father had chosen over her. That was when she saw him, an elderly man, perhaps 75, perhaps older, seated on a wrought iron bench at the edge of the sidewalk with no umbrella and no shelter. He was in a wheelchair. His jacket, gray, thin, fraying at the collar, was soaked through. His hands, folded in his lap, shook with the fine tremor of age or cold or both. He was staring at the door of the funeral home with an expression so patient it broke something open in Nora's chest. Like a man who had learned not to expect anyone to come. She looked back into the lobby. Her sister-in-law, Dominic's sister Priya, stood near the guest book, perfectly composed in Chanel. 2 of her father's law partners walked past the old man without turning their heads. The funeral attendant, young, bored, suited, glanced outside and then deliberately looked at his phone. Nobody. Nobody was going to help him. Nora walked back out into the rain. "Can I wheel you inside, sir? There's space right up front." He looked up at her. His eyes, she noticed, were deep and unusual gray, the color of winter rivers, and far too sharp for a man that appeared so helpless. "Most people walk right by," he said. His voice was rougher than she expected. "Like I'm part of the weather." "Most people aren't paying attention," she said. She pushed him through the door. She found him a spot near the back, away from the crowds, where he could see the casket. She took off her own cardigan, her only layer over her dress, and draped it across his wet shoulders. She turned to go back to her husband. That was when Dominic appeared at her elbow. His hand closed around her wrist. His voice was quiet, controlled, the voice he used when he was furious and there were witnesses. "What are you doing?" He needed help, Dom. "You are pregnant. You are standing in the rain. You are embarrassing yourself in front of these people on the day of your father's—" "He needed help," she said again, simple, final. Dominic looked at her. She had been married to him for 6 years. She knew his face better than she knew her own. She knew the exact geography of every expression he wore. She knew his real laugh versus his performed laugh, his genuine concern versus his strategic concern. What she saw on his face in that moment was not grief. It was not embarrassment. It was a calculation gone wrong. "Go sit down," he said, low, final. She didn't move, and that is when he did it. Open palm, right cheek. The crack of it ricocheted off the marble lobby floor and the high ceiling, and the walls hung with floral arrangements, and 209 people turned in unison toward the sound. The flowers on the nearest arrangement trembled. Nora's head turned to the side. She tasted copper. She touched her cheek, and her fingers came away with a thin line of red where his college ring had caught the corner of her bone. In the entire room, attorneys, judges, deacons, society wives, former colleagues of her father, childhood friends she hadn't seen in a decade, watched, and not one of them said a word. Not one. She looked at Dominic. He was already composing his expression into something that looked like regret, already preparing the version of this he would tell people. "She provoked me. She's been irrational since the pregnancy. I barely touched her. You know how she gets." She had heard all of those sentences before. She would never hear them again. "Excuse me," she said quietly, to no one in particular. She walked to the ladies' room. She pressed a paper towel to her cheek. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Behind her, through the wall, she heard the murmur of the service beginning. The old man in the wheelchair watched the empty doorway where she had disappeared. His gray eyes were not confused. They were not surprised. They were the eyes of a man who had just seen exactly what he came to see.
Let me tell you about Bernard Calloway. Born 1947 in Beaufort, South Carolina, the third of 5 children of a Baptist minister and a schoolteacher, grew up with nothing he would call a hardship and nothing he would call comfort. Studied law on scholarship at the University of Georgia. Argued his first federal case at 25. By 40, he was the youngest federal judge appointed in the state's modern history. By 50, he was one of the most respected legal minds in the Southeast. By 52, he was a man who had made one catastrophic mistake and spent the rest of his life trying to undo it. The mistake had a name. Her name was Margaret Holloway Reeve. She came into Bernard's life 2 years after the death of Nora's mother. Soft-spoken, graceful, the widow of a real estate magnate, with a talent for making every room feel warmer simply by being in it. She was 50. She was beautiful. She made Bernard laugh for the first time in 2 years. He married her in 11 months. Nora was 15,
and stood at the back of the church and smiled because her father was smiling, and she had decided long ago that his happiness mattered more than her unease. Even the unease she could not name. Even the thing in her stomach that felt like swallowing a stone. Margaret was not cruel to Nora. That is important to understand. She was not a villain from a fairy tale. She was something more complicated and therefore more dangerous. She was a woman who wanted all of Bernard Calloway and had the patience and intelligence to take him piece by piece. She did it slowly, so slowly. First, the dinners, just the two of them, she and Bernard. We need our time, Nora, sweetheart. You understand, you're old enough. Then the business trips, and Bernard began bringing Margaret instead of coming home to Nora's school plays. Then the trust restructuring, just a formality, standard estate planning, nothing for you to worry about. That quietly shifted the family assets from a joint trust with Nora as primary beneficiary to a new structure with Margaret's name embedded at every layer. Nora didn't know about the trust restructuring until she was 22. She found the documents by accident, looking for her birth certificate in her father's home office. Wrong drawer. She spread them on the kitchen table and read them for 2 hours while her father was at a charity dinner with Margaret. When Bernard came home, she was still at the table. What followed was the worst conversation of her life. Bernard did not deny the documents. He explained them with the careful precision of a federal judge who had spent decades finding the most defensible framing for difficult facts. Margaret had been generous enough to enter this marriage knowing the family situation was complex. The restructuring was simply responsible planning. It didn't change how he felt about Nora. "Does it change what I inherit?" she had asked. Bernard had gone quiet. That silence answered her question more completely than any words. She packed a bag that night. She did not say goodbye. She did not hear from her father for 3 years. When she finally did, a letter, handwritten, careful, arriving at her apartment in Atlanta 6 weeks later, she could not bring herself to open it for 6 weeks. When she did, it was 2 pages. It said he was sorry. It said he had made a mistake. It said Margaret had told him things about Nora that he had believed and now suspected were untrue. It said, "I should have fought harder. I was a coward. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try." Nora wrote back, 3 sentences. "I got your letter. I need time. Please don't stop trying." He didn't stop. For the next 8 years, Bernard Calloway wrote to his daughter every month. Some letters she read immediately, some she held for weeks before opening, some she answered, some she didn't. It was not reconciliation, not exactly. It was something more like a slow unwinding of a knot, one thread at a time, the work of people who love each other and have hurt each other and don't know how to cross back but keep trying anyway. She had not known he was sick. She had not known that for the last 2 years, while he was still writing those monthly letters, cheerful letters, proud letters, letters asking about her pregnancy with a warmth that made her cry, he had not known. He had been receiving treatments for pancreatic cancer in a clinic 3 states away. He had not told her because he didn't want her to spend a single day grieving in advance. He had not told her, but he had been preparing. Bernard Calloway had spent the last 2 years of his life building a trap, and he needed his daughter to spring it.
The Man in the Rain. His name was Emmett Graves, 73 years old, senior founding partner of Graves, Aldrich, and Wren, one of the most prestigious estate law firms in the southeastern United States. The same firm's paralegal, Thomas Wren, had called Nora to tell her about the funeral. He had known Bernard Calloway for 41 years. They had met in 1983 when Bernard was a young federal prosecutor and Emmett was a 20-year public defender with a genius for constitutional arguments and no patience for shortcuts. They had breakfast together every other Tuesday for 4 decades. They had buried their fathers in the same year.
Bernard had called Emmett to his hospital bed 14 months before he died. "I need you to design something," Bernard had said. "Not a will, a test." Emmett had arrived at Whitfield & Sons funeral home in a wheelchair he didn't need, wearing a jacket from a second-hand store, with clouded contact lenses dimming his sharp gray eyes. He had sat in the rain for 38 minutes. He had watched 193 people walk past him. And then Nora Calloway had walked back out into the rain. The will reading. The service lasted 90 minutes. Nora sat in the third row, which was where the seating chart, prepared, she later learned, by Margaret, had placed her. Not the front row, not beside the family, third row, between a retired law clerk she'd never met and an empty chair. Dominic sat in the second row. He had been placed there by the same seating chart. Separate from Nora, but close enough to the family to be visible. Margaret had thought of everything. The service was beautiful in the way of performances by people who have rehearsed, eulogies from colleagues and former law clerks and a state senator, a choir, a reading from scripture that Bernard had loved and that Nora remembered him quoting at breakfast when she was 8 years old. She held herself together. When it was over, Dominic found her immediately. He took her hand. His touch was careful, practiced, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that had learned to look like one. "We need to talk about tonight." "Tonight?" "The hotel. We have a suite at the mansion. The family will gather there after the burial." He said it smoothly, as if she were naturally included, as if what happened in the lobby hadn't happened at all. "And Margaret is okay with that?" "Of course," Dominic said. "You're Bernard's daughter." She looked at him. He looked back at her. He had his concerned face, his loving face. She had once believed in that face the way people believe in weather forecasts, not perfectly, not always, but enough to plan your life around it. She said, "I'll be there." What she didn't say, "I know what you want. I just don't know yet how much you know." The will reading was scheduled for Monday morning. It was a Sunday evening when Nora got the call. She was alone in the hotel room. Dominic had gone to the lobby bar with Margaret's attorneys, just a casual drink, just getting acquainted, when Thomas Wren called. "Miss Calloway, there's something you need to know before tomorrow's reading. Mr. Graves has asked me to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" "The will is not what anyone expects, including, especially, your stepmother." A pause. "Can you meet Mr. Graves tonight, alone, without your husband?" She looked at the closed hotel room door. She thought about Dominic downstairs, drinking with Margaret's attorneys, just a casual drink, just getting acquainted. She thought about the question he had asked when she told him about the funeral. "Will there be a will reading?" "Yes," she said. "Tell me where." Emmett Graves met her in a private room at a restaurant 3 blocks from the hotel. He was not in a wheelchair. He was not wearing a second-hand jacket. He sat at a corner table in a Carsole suit that fit him like a second skin, his gray eyes clear and sharp, and carrying the particular attention of a man who had spent 4 decades reading people across courtroom tables. She stopped in the doorway. "You?" she said. "Me," he said. She crossed the room and sat down across from him. "How long were you out there?" 38 minutes. She was quiet for a moment. "Were you cold?" "Profoundly," he said. "Your father owed me considerably for that." She almost smiled. "What is this about, Mr. Graves?" He set a folder on the table. Inside was a document, not the will itself, but a summary, 3 pages, dense with legal language that she read twice before looking up. "He knew," she said. "He knew," Emmett confirmed. "For 18 months, he knew exactly what Margaret had been doing, what your husband had been doing." She went very still. Dominic. Your husband, Emmett said carefully, has been in a business relationship with Margaret for approximately 4 years. He was introduced through a mutual contact at a financial conference. They discovered their mutual interest shortly thereafter. Nora looked at the table. He married me knowing. He married you to be positioned, Emmett said. He believed, and Margaret confirmed to him, that Bernard's health was declining, that the family trust would pass to Margaret after his death, and that Margaret had agreed to a private arrangement in which your husband's consulting firm would manage a portion of the trust's assets in exchange for certain considerations. Considerations. His loyalty, his willingness to manage any complications. I'm the complication. Emmett said nothing. She sat with it, the full weight of 6 years, the nights he had stayed late at the office, the trips to Savannah she hadn't known about, the investment firm that had expanded so faster than she could explain, the way he had held her hand on the drive down and told her everything would be okay. How much does he know about the real will? Nothing, Emmett said. No one does, except you and I in the court that sealed it 14 months ago. What is the real will? He slid the second document across the table. She read it. Then she read it again. The number at the bottom didn't process the first time. 14 billion? 14,200 million net of estate taxes as structured, including the family trust, which your father quietly restructured 8 months ago after the forensic accounting work commissioned through 3 blind holding companies she has no access to. She doesn't know. She has no reason to suspect it. The forensic accounting work your father commissioned was conducted through 3 blind holding companies she has no access to. Nora sat back in her chair. Her hand moved to her stomach. The baby, a boy she had just found out, a boy she had already decided to name Bernard, shifted in response, a small pressure, like a hand pressing back. What does he need me to do? Simply walk into that room tomorrow morning and be exactly who you already are.
Monday came in cold and bright. Savannah in November is a complicated beauty, the Spanish moss silver with dew, the cobblestones glistening, the magnolia trees stripped to their bones. Nora stood at the window of the hotel room at 6 in the morning, watching the street come to life while Dominic slept. She watched him sleep. She had done that often in their 6 years. She had always found it reassuring, the way sleep stripped away his performance, the way he looked, unconscious, like someone younger and less careful. She had thought that was the real him, the unguarded version, the one she married. Now she understood she had been reading sleep the same way she had been reading everything else about him. Wrong. He woke at 7. He was in good spirits. He showered, dressed in his best suit, checked his phone with the particular attentiveness she now understood was not general business, but specific calculation. He kissed her cheek. Not the bruised one, the other one. "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. The offices of Graves, Aldrich, and Wren occupied a restored colonial building on Bull Street, 3 stories of dark wood and tall windows, and the kind of deep institutional quiet that only accumulates over generations. The conference room on the 2nd floor had 12 seats and a long oak table and a window overlooking a courtyard garden. Margaret arrived first. She was 61 years old and carried those years with the precision of a woman who had decided long ago to treat aging as a project to be managed rather than a process to be lived. She wore dove gray. Her hair was perfect. Her 2 attorneys, both from the same aggressive Buckhead firm, sat beside her with matching briefcases. She looked at Nora with an expression of practiced sympathy. "I'm so glad you came," Margaret said. "He was my father," Nora said. A flicker behind Margaret's eyes.
Nothing in her face changed, but something behind it rearranged. Dominic sat beside Nora. His posture was perfectly calibrated, supportive but not dominant, present but not conspicuous. The posture of a man who wants to be in a room without appearing to want anything. At 9 o'clock, the door opened. Emmett Graves walked in. He sat at the head of the table, opened a thin briefcase, looked around the room without hurry. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I am Emmett Graves, senior partner of this firm, and executor of the estate of Bernard Joseph Calloway. Before I read the document, I want to clarify a procedural matter." Margaret's lead attorney leaned forward. "We'd like to begin with a review of the asset inventories." "You'll have that opportunity," Emmett said, without looking at him, "after I finish." He set a recording device on the table. "This is standard practice for estates of this complexity," he said. "Everything said in this room from this point forward is on the record." Margaret's attorney opened his mouth. Emmett looked at him once. The attorney closed his mouth. "Bernard Joseph Calloway," Emmett began, "spent 40 years building one of the most sophisticated legal and financial structures in the southeastern United States. He did it quietly, he did it carefully, and in the last 2 years of his life, after receiving his diagnosis, he expanded that structure to include one final element." He looked at the table. His hands were folded. His voice was perfectly controlled. "A test." What happened next took 4 minutes. Emmett described in careful legal language what had occurred at the funeral home. The bench outside, the rain, the wheelchair, the clouded contacts, the 38 minutes. He described Nora walking out into the rain. He described the cardigan. He did not describe what happened after, but everyone in the room knew what had happened. Margaret went very still. Dominic went very still. The attorneys looked at each other. "The will of Bernard Joseph Calloway," Emmett said, "names one primary beneficiary." He slid the document to the center of the table. "His daughter, Nora Ann Calloway Durant." Silence. Total silence. "Total estate value, net of applicable taxes and structured disbursements, is $14,200,000,000. Another pause. "This includes a complete retransfer of the Calloway Family Trust executed 14 months ago, which supersedes all prior trust documentation." Margaret made a sound that was not a word. It was the sound of something breaking that had believed itself unbreakable. Her lead attorney was on his feet. The challenge came in 10 days. Margaret Calloway Reeve filed a formal contest on the grounds of undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and procedural impropriety. She hired Harlan Price, the most aggressive estate litigator in the state of Georgia. She spent the first 2 weeks on an offensive so comprehensive it felt almost beautiful in its fury. Motions, depositions, discovery demands, press statements, strategic leaks to sympathetic journalists. By the end of the first week, the story was everywhere. Bernard Calloway's secret will, illegitimate daughter seizes family estate. Nora had not known the word illegitimate was going to appear in the coverage. She sat in her Atlanta apartment. She had not gone back to the Savannah house, not once, not to collect her things, not for any reason, and read the article on her phone at 2 in the morning, her hands very steady and her face very still. Illegitimate. Her father had been married to her mother for 11 years before her mother died. She had been born in wedlock, in a hospital, with both parents present in the 2nd year of their marriage. The word was being used not in its legal sense, but in its social one, as in she did not belong, as in she had no right, as in the $14 billion was not hers but Margaret's, and Margaret deserved it because Margaret had been there and Nora had not. She called Emmett. "I saw," he said, before she could speak. "Where does it come from?" A journalist named Terrence Hobbs. He's been receiving documents from an anonymous source for 6 days. The documents are real, but decontextualized. Your birth certificate is real, but the description of your parents' marriage has been altered in the summary provided to him. Altered? How? The date of the marriage has been changed to appear after your birth. Nora closed her eyes. Margaret. Almost certainly through an intermediary. The original documents are sealed in the family court archive. Access would require either judicial authorization or someone who knows how to get around that. A pause. There is a clerk, Emmett said, in the Chatham County Family Court who received a $12,000 personal loan from a company associated with Holloway Advisory Partners 4 months ago. We are currently documenting that. Nora looked at the window. Outside, Atlanta moved through another ordinary night. Traffic lights cycling, a distant siren, the orange glow of the city reflecting off low clouds. I want to know everything, she said. Everything she's done. Every document, every dollar, every person she's paid. I know, Emmett said. My father spent 2 years building this. He did. He gave me everything he had, the evidence, the structure, the plan. Her voice was perfectly level. Now I need to know how to use it. That, Emmett said, is exactly what I am going to teach you. The courtroom of Judge Adeza Okonkwo was on the 4th floor of the Chatham County Courthouse, a high-ceilinged room with long windows and benches that had absorbed more than a century of human reckoning. Judge Okonkwo was 61 years old. She had been on the bench for 27 years. She had the reputation, among the attorneys who appeared before her, of having a perfect memory, an absolute intolerance for manipulation, and a particular attention to the moments when emotion was being used as a substitute for evidence. She had known Bernard Calloway for 30 years. She had not recused herself. Neither party had asked her to. Nora's attorneys had quietly confirmed through channels that Judge Okonkwo had reviewed the recusal question independently and determined she had no conflict. What they didn't know, what only Emmett knew, was that Bernard Calloway once, 22 years ago, had recused himself from a case at considerable professional cost because he believed his personal history with one party might compromise his impartiality.
Judge Okonkwo remembered that. She intended to honor it. The courtroom was full, not merely full, overflowing. Reporters in the corridor, cameras at the back, spectators who had arrived before dawn to secure seats. This was the largest estate contest in Georgia history, and everyone understood that what happened in this room would set precedent for decades. Margaret arrived in charcoal. Her attorneys, Price and a team of 4, arranged their materials with the unhurried confidence of people who expect to win. Nora arrived in navy blue, with Emmett beside her, and her attorney, Dr. Sylvia O'Coffer, former constitutional law professor, 30 years in estate practice, a woman who had never lost a contested estate case, walking on her left. Nora was 7 months pregnant. She sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands folded on the surface and her face calm and her eyes fixed on the bench. She did not look at Margaret. She did not look at Dominic, who sat in the 3rd row with his own attorney and who had, through his attorney, attempted to reach Nora 14 times in the past 6 weeks. She had not responded. She looked at the bench. She thought about her father. She thought about the morning she had found the trust documents in his desk drawer, 19 years old. The feeling of that moment, not anger, not grief, but something colder and quieter, a door closing. She thought about the letter that had arrived 3 years later, the way she had held it for 6 weeks before opening it, the way she had cried reading it, alone in her apartment, while the city outside went about its ordinary life. She thought about every letter after that, every carefully chosen word from a man who had the vocabulary of a federal judge and was trying to build something with it that had no precedent in law, a bridge back. He had been building a bridge for 11 years.
All rise. Harland Price was an excellent attorney. This is important to understand. He was not incompetent or careless. He was in fact one of the best estate litigators in the state, and the case he presented was a sophisticated, carefully constructed argument that would have been effective against almost any other opposing case. The problem was that Bernard Calloway had anticipated every argument Price would make and prepared a counter for each one. Price argued incapacity. Sylvia O'Coffer presented the 16 hours of recorded testimony, Bernard on camera, in 5 separate sessions over 8 months, discussing the will in detail. In the last session, taken 3 weeks before his death, Bernard had recited from memory the relevant statute law, cited 3 precedent cases, and then looked directly at the camera and said, "I know exactly what I am doing. I have always known exactly what I am doing." That's the problem with loving someone who doesn't understand what you've built. They assume the builder has lost his mind because they can't see the blueprints. Price argued undue influence by Emmett Graves. Sylvia presented the affidavits of 22 independent witnesses to the will's execution, including 2 sitting federal judges. Price argued that the trust restructuring was invalid. Sylvia presented the forensic accounting documentation, 3 independent firms, a trail so complete and so carefully annotated that it read not like evidence gathered in a legal dispute, but a legal textbook on how to document financial manipulation. She also presented the financial records. What they showed stopped the room. $6.2 million. Over 9 years, Margaret Calloway had redirected $6.2 million from the family trust through a network of 19 shell companies, 13 of which she had created in the 4 years before Bernard's diagnosis, suggesting she knew or suspected that time was limited and accelerated her extraction. She had funded Dominic Durrant's consulting firm. She had financed 3 real estate purchases in his name. She had transferred in 11 transactions the equivalent of his annual salary for 6 years. She had bought a husband for her stepdaughter. She had done it so that when Bernard died, Dominic would be in the house, in the marriage, positioned to help manage whatever came next. The courtroom heard this in the particular silence of people who have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. Judge Okonkwo looked at the exhibits for a long time. She looked at Margaret. She looked at Nora. She said, "Counsel, I want every document in Exhibits A through R certified and entered into the permanent record. I also want the matter of the Chatham County Court records breach referred to the State Attorney's Office for independent investigation." She paused. "This court will recess until 2 o'clock." In the recess, Nora found herself in a small conference room with Emmett and Sylvia, eating a sandwich she could not taste and reviewing the afternoon's expected testimony schedule. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered it. A woman's voice, old, southern, careful. "Ms. Calloway, my name is Dorothy Reeves. I was your father's administrative assistant for 19 years. A pause. "I don't know if I should be making this call. I know it's improper, but I need you to know something." "Go ahead," Nora said. "Your father talked about you every week, every single week, for 11 years. He kept your letters in his desk drawer, not in a file, in the drawer where he could reach them without looking. He read them again. I saw him on days when things were bad. He would just sit quietly and read them, and then he would go back to work." Nora was still. "He used to say," the old woman continued, "that you were the best thing he'd ever done and the thing he was most afraid of losing. He said he just needed you to know that he never stopped." "I know," Nora said. Her voice was steady. "I know now." A silence. "He was a good man," Dorothy Reeves said. "He made mistakes, but he was a good man." "He was," Nora said. "Thank you for calling." She set down the phone. She finished the sandwich. She went back into the courtroom.
He testified on the 3rd day. Harland Price had not called him. Sylvia O'Coffer had. Dominic Durant took the witness stand in a gray suit with the composed, practiced posture of a man who believes his composure is indistinguishable from innocence. He had spent, Sylvia's team estimated, considerable time with a crisis communications consultant. He had prepared answers, he had prepared expressions, he had prepared the story he intended to tell. He had not prepared for the documents. Sylvia laid out the wire transfers one at a time. Each one she placed on the screen at the front of the courtroom. Each one she gave Dominic a moment to look at before asking, "Can you explain this transfer?" The first three he explained: consulting fees, standard industry arrangement, nothing irregular. The fourth one he could not explain because the recipient account, a numbered Cayman account, had been traced back to a holding company that also received funds from Margaret Calloway's personal trust, and the dates created a timeline that made the consulting fee explanation mathematically impossible. The fifth one he could not explain because it had been made from a device registered to his personal email address at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the day that Nora had told him about Bernard's death, within minutes of learning she might inherit. The courtroom understood the implications before Sylvia said anything. She let them understand. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Durant, were you aware, at the time of your marriage to Nora Calloway, of the potential estate value of her father's holdings?" A long silence. "I was generally aware," Dominic said, "that Bernard Calloway was a wealthy man. I'm asking about the specific figure. Were you aware, before the marriage, of the approximate net value of the Calloway estate?" Another silence. "I may have had some—" "Yes or no, Mr. Durant?" He looked at his attorney. His attorney made a small motion with his hand. "Yes," Dominic said. "And who provided you with that information?" The longest silence. "Margaret Calloway," he said. The room exhaled. Nora did not look at him. She was looking at her hands on the table. She was thinking about the drive from Atlanta, the gas station crackers, the hand-holding, the everything is going to be okay. She was thinking about her son, moving in her body, learning the world through her heartbeat, already learning her steadiness, her silence, her refusal to break. "He's going to be okay," she thought. "We're going to be okay." This time she believed it for different reasons. Judge Okonkwo delivered her ruling on a Friday morning. She spoke for 22 minutes. She spoke about the law with precision and completeness. She spoke about the evidence with specificity. She spoke about the standard for testamentary capacity and the standard for undue influence and the evidentiary threshold required to override a properly executed document witnessed by 22 parties. And then she sent down the legal language aside. "I knew Bernard Calloway for 30 decades. He was not a perfect man. He made choices he later regretted. He failed people he loved in ways that cost them years they will never get back." She looked at Nora. "This court finds the challenge to the will of Bernard Joseph Calloway to be without merit and without evidentiary support." A pause. "The will stands as written. Nora Ann Calloway Durant is confirmed as sole primary beneficiary of the Calloway estate, effective immediately." Another pause. "This court also refers the matters of financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and the falsification of public records to the State Attorney General's Office for Criminal Prosecution, and transmits the full evidentiary record for that office's review." She set down her papers. "This proceeding is closed." Margaret did not speak on her way out. She walked past Nora's table, with her attorneys flanking her, in her face composed, in her head straight, in her hands perfectly still at her sides. At the door, she stopped. She did not turn around.
He was the only person, she said to the air in front of her, who ever made me feel like I was enough. A silence. And I spent 20 years making sure he wasn't. The door opened, the light came in. She walked through it.
Nora went into labor 6 weeks later during a board meeting. The irony was not lost on her. She was in the middle of presenting the first 100-day operational plan to the reconstituted Callaway Holdings Board, a board from which 3 members had quietly resigned in the aftermath of the trial, when her body simply decided that enough had been decided for one day, and that this was now the priority. Emmett, who had been sitting in the corner in an advisory capacity, watched her pause mid-sentence and look down and then look up. "Mr. Graves," she said very calmly, "I believe we're going to need to table the infrastructure discussion." "I would agree with that assessment," Emmett said. She had the presence of mind to email her notes to 3 board members before getting into the car. Bernard Joseph Callaway Durant was born on a Thursday evening at 7:14 p.m. He weighed 8 pounds and 2 ounces. He had his mother's dark eyes and his grandfather's stubborn jaw, and hands so precisely like his great-grandmother's in the one photograph Nora had of her that Emmett cried when he saw them. He was the first man Emmett had cried for since Bernard. Nora held her son in the hospital room while the last light came through the window and painted the ceiling gold. She thought about the Sunday she had sat on the tile floor of her bathroom and held the unopened letter from her father for 6 weeks. She thought about finally opening it. She thought about the 3 sentences she had written back. "I got your letter. I need time. Please don't stop trying." He didn't stop. She looked at her son. "Your grandfather built something impossible," she told him, "and then he gave it away to make sure it was worth something." She pressed her lips to his forehead. "He couldn't be here, but he was here. He's been here the whole time." The baby made a sound that was not a word but was something. It was enough. 18 months later, Margaret Callaway Reeve pled guilty to 3 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud an estate. She received 7 years, with parole eligibility after 4. She was 62 years old. Dominic Durant pled guilty to 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of spousal financial abuse. He received 30 months. He served 19. He called Nora's phone once the day of his release. She did not answer. The Chatham County Court clerk who provided access to the sealed records received a suspended sentence and lost her position. Terrence Hobbs, the journalist, published a correction and a retraction. He cited pressure from an unnamed source. He later named the source as an intermediary connected to Price's firm. Price received a bar complaint. The complaint is pending. Emmett Graves retired from active practice and accepted the position of trustee of the Callaway Foundation. The foundation builds community legal aid centers. The first one was named for Bernard. The second was named for Nora's mother, who had died 21 years earlier without knowing that the daughter she had raised would one day have the resources to put her name on something permanent. There is a wrought iron bench outside the Chatham and Sons Funeral Home on Drayton Street in Savannah, Georgia. It has been there for as long as anyone can remember. On a rainy Saturday in November, a woman named Nora sat on that bench with her 17-month-old son on her lap and a man in his 70s beside her with sharp gray eyes and a charcoal coat. She had driven down from Atlanta that morning. She had stood at her father's grave for an hour. She had brought no flowers. She had always thought flowers at graves were for the living.
But she had brought her son, and she had introduced them, and she had said the things she needed to say. Then she had come here. Do you know what he told me the last time I saw him? Nora shook her head. He said, I've been a coward my whole life about the things that mattered most to me. I learned from my father to build walls instead of bridges. I didn't know until it was too late that walls keep love out just as effectively as they keep pain out. A pause. He said, Emmett, I need Nora to know that the wall was mine. Every single brick was mine. I put it up. I let it stand. She tried to get over it. She kept trying, and I kept adding to it because I was afraid of what I'd find if she got through. The rain began, soft and steady. The bench grew wet. Neither of them moved. What did you say? Nora asked. I said, then it's time to take it down. She was quiet for a moment. Her son reached up and touched her face with one small hand, the way babies do, exploring the contours of the world through the people they trust most often. He did, she said. He did, Emmett agreed. They sat in the rain. The city moved around them. Above them, through the water-heavy Spanish moss and the November clouds and whatever else lies above the ordinary grief of ordinary Tuesday and Saturday mornings, Bernard Joseph Calloway rested. His daughter was home.
Before you go, I have to ask you something. Bernard Calloway spent 11 years writing letters his daughter might never read, showing up in ways she might never know, trying to build a bridge back to someone he had failed. He never gave up. But here's the real question, the one I keep thinking about. Is there someone in your life you've been meaning to reach out to? Someone you've let too much time pass with? Someone who might be waiting, right now, for a letter you haven't sent yet? Because Bernard almost ran out of time, and some of us already have. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, go send that message, right now, before the moment passes. And if you want more stories that make you feel things you forgot you were capable of feeling, subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like this one don't just tell us what happened, they remind us who we're supposed to be.